Welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to do all 5 challenges from my 2D arrays video. So starting off with challenge 1, we are going to display all items in the 2D array. So in the description of the 2D arrays video I did paste this entire array so you could use it in these challenges quite easily. If you can't do that for whatever reason, you can attempt to write this out yourself, but it does take a while. So I already showed you how to loop through and print this array in the video, but I'll do it again anyway, just to go through how to actually print. So how many rows are there in this? So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. So we're going to need to loop from 0 to 8 rows. So 0 to 7 rows. So we're actually going to do less than 8. And what I like to do is in the for loop, instead of using I like to actually use the word row, so I know exactly what I'm referring to when I'm looking at either the row or the column of the 2D array. Inside there, we're going to do another for loop, and a simple copy and paste will work. And this time, we're going to do each column. There you go. So column, column, column. So with this for loop, I'm going to loop through all rows and all columns. Now, something I didn't show you that you may have already seen actually get suggested is that you can, if you want to, just like in a one-dimensional array, you can get the array length. That's not going to quite work in this, so chessboard dot length isn't going to work because there's 2 lengths in here. There's the rows and the columns. But what we can do is we can say get length, and the get length, I think we need to use brackets and then say, do we want to get the length of the first dimension or the second dimension, or more precisely the 0th dimension or the first dimension. So with 8 rows and 8 columns, this would be dimension 0, this would be dimension 1. So we're just going to do that just in case in the future it changes the length of the 2D array. Now a chessboard is not going to change, but just showing you just if you want to know how to do that in the future. So this is going to loop through the rows, this is going to loop through the columns, and a simple console.writeLine will output all rows and all columns. It will output them all in a big list. I forgot to do a console.readKey, so we'll do that now. There we go. It will output them in a big list. So, oops, where's that gone? I'm just going to close it down. My window disappeared. Try that again. So it's going to output them in a big list like this. So let's output them as a square. So the way we do that is we can say chess. So not chess, what am I doing? We remove the line, so write doesn't add a new line after the output, and then after we've output each column in a row, we can just say write line, and we can write just a new line like that, and that will output them as a square. And again, as I showed you in the video, a good way to actually present it is adding something in between each of them. You could put a comma in between each of them, or what I like to do is add the pipe symbol. So pipe symbol in between all of them. You can see it separated them quite nicely. So after that, what we need to do is move the king's pawn forward, so the white king's pawn forward 2 places. So P5 should move to row 6, column 5. So let's have a look at an actual chessboard and see how this is going to work. So the king's pawn is a common first move. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say you're coding a chess AI and you want it to do the first move for the white king and move this pawn. So this is in row 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So row 6, column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So row 6, column 4. So let's make sure we write that down. Chessboard 6, 4. Just writing this here so I can remember what's moving there. So the one from 6, 4, which should be this one right here, that P5. We want to do a bit of code that's going to move that pawn forward 2 spaces. And that means it's going to go from 6, 4 to this one here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. So 6, 4 to 4, 4. So how can we do that? What we can do is we can say chessboard 4, 4 is equal to chessboard 6, 4. Let's spell it correctly. There we go. So chessboard 4, 4 is going to equal to chessboard 6, 4. Only problem with this is if I run it now, can you see it's duplicated the pawn? So it's duplicated there. So what we'll then need to do is say that chessboard 6, 4 is now equal to, and because I've added a space in between all of them, I'm going to make sure I add the space here just so it shows consistently when we're printing it out. So there we go. We're just going to add a space there. And you can see it's printed them all out. It has put them, I think we need to add 2 spaces actually. So 2 spaces I think should, there you go, that's better. So you can see that's moved that pawn forward. So you can imagine there's lots of different subroutines that will fire off that's going to be able to move pieces around just like I showed. Obviously a real chess game would be a lot more complicated than doing stuff like this, but you're starting to get the idea of how you can move items around in a 2-dimensional array. So challenge 3 was, can you display the position of one of the units? So for example, if they type in K1, it should show the position of K1. Now, what I've done is all of the white pieces are in uppercase and all of the black pieces are in lowercase, just to show you, just to sort of differentiate which piece is which. So how do we find, for example, if we search for P5, how do we know what row and what column it is? Because it could be in different row and different column depending on what part of the game we're in. So we're going to use this loop here, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a selection statement. So let's put an input. So console.writeLine, what piece are you looking for? And we'll do a string user input is equal to console.readLine. So we're going to need to put let's do 2 integers. So I'm not going to call this row and column because we're already using row and column in this for loop. So let's do something else. Let's call this search row. Now I'm not going to start it at 0 because I want to give a value to say if we don't find this piece, then I'm going to say it's going to start off with -1. So if we don't find either piece of it, so we don't find the row or the column, if both of these are equal to -1, that means that that piece doesn't actually exist. So we can actually give a message to say that doesn't exist. So let's go search row, search column. And once we've found the piece, so we're going to loop through, we'll get rid of this right line because we don't need it because we're not outputting anything. So inside this loop that's going to loop through all the rows and the columns, we can put a selection statement. So if the user input is equal to the current chessboard row column, then we set the search row to equal to whatever the current row is. We set the search column to equal to whatever the search column is, so whatever the current column is. And that way, once we get to the end of the for loop, it's going to leave us with a row and a column. So what we can say is if, let's do a selection statement, and we only need to check if one of them is -1, because if it finds one of them, then it's going to set both of them. So we're going to check the search row. Does the search row equal -1? If it does, then that piece doesn't exist. So we can say console.writeLine piece does not exist. And then we can do an else statement that piece is in row, and we can add the search row, and we can add and column, and we'll add the search column. You can present this however you like. I'm just going to present it this way. So you can put the rows and columns on different lines. I'm just going to write it like that. So let's test this out. So let's search for the Black's Rook. So R1. So we can see that's in row 0, column 0. Perfect. Let's search for the White's Queen. So that's in Q1. We can see that's in row 7, column 0, 1, 2, 3. So that works. So let's search for something that doesn't exist. That piece doesn't exist. Now there's a little bit of a problem with this, that if you put in 2 spaces, so if I put space, space, it's going to find all of the spaces, and it'll actually find whatever the last space and the last one is. So we found that in row 5 and column 7. So row 5, column 7 is the last where we find the spaces. We could put an if statement that says, now we've put an outer while loop to fix this, so we can do a do while loop. Yeah, so we're going to create the user input here, and we're going to say, oops, user input. So I'm being a little bit extra here, but do the while user input does not equal, so we don't want them to put in that double space. If they put in that double space, get them to write it again. So there you go. So the do while should start here and end here. There we go. So let's double check this works. Actually, let's put the user input here and then put a little message to say, so yeah, let's do it this way around. So we'll say the while loop is up here. Sorry, this is very messy. I'll fix this in a sec. So that moves up here. One thing you've got to watch out for is you shouldn't put semicolons after either a selection or a while loop, because it'll cancel out the while loop. So we're going to make sure there's no semicolon there. You do put a semicolon if the while is at the bottom of the do while loop, but you don't put it at the top. It's one of those things you just have to remember. So if it doesn't equal a space, just put a little please enter a valid input. So that catches our little if they put double space. That, oh no, it didn't catch that. So while use input equals space space, not equals. So what are you looking for? Space space. Please enter a valid input. Now any other ones, if I put some silly inputs like that, that doesn't exist, but that fixes that double space issue that we had. So what is the next challenge? So write a program to loop through all of the elements and count how many pawns each player has and display it. So you can have, we'll do this in a selection statement. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to use something that I haven't taught you yet, and the reason is I could say if it equals P1, P2, P3, P4, but that's going to take ages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this for loop. Let's get rid of all of this. Let's get rid of all of this, and we'll use this loop and this selection. So we're going to replace the condition in the selection to say if the current row and chessboard we are looking at is equal to, and not we're going to say equal to, we're going to say dot contains. So this is something that I'm going to go through probably in the next video when we're looking at strings. So the dot contains. does it contain the letter P? If it does, then it's going to, is it going to count? That's not the right one. I think it's asking us to count. So count how many pawns each player has. So this is for the black pawns, the lowercase pawns. So let's do a console. So what we're going to need to do is a counter actually. So we're going to have a counter plus equals 1. So I need to create the counter for it. So we're going to say int black counter starting at 0 and int white counter also starting at 0. So the lowercase is for the black pieces. We say plus equals 1. The uppercase is for the white pieces, and so we can say white counter plus equals 1. So after we've gone through the for loop and counted them all out, that's when we can say console.writeLine white has plus white counter pawns remaining and black has this many pawns remaining. So it should say 8 each if I've done this correctly. So we've got 8 and 8. So if I was to remove one of them, let's say black loses one of the pawns. Now white has 8, black has 7. Let's double check if we remove this pawn from the white, this pawn from the white. So that should mean white has now 6 pawns and black has 7 pawns remaining. So probably a chess game is not going to be able to, not going to need to count each the amount of pawns because it's just going to display it to the player. But you get to see, you can see, sort of see the method I can use for counting how many of certain items exist in an array. So the final one was write a program that can calculate, so it can add up all elements in an array, but the 2D array should be populated with the random numbers. So let's do that now using this here. So I'm going to change this to random nums. I'm going to use an integer and an integer, but I don't think we're going to do 8 by 8 because that would take a little while to make. Instead, we're going to start off with a set number of numbers just so I can test it out. And then we're going to change it in a bit so we can add random numbers. So let's make a very, very small one. So we're going to go 1, 2, and 3 and 4. So this 2-dimensional array is only going to contain 4 elements. So 2 rows and 2 columns. So do I have, what's missing from here? Do I need a, there we go, that's what I need. So you can see because I use the get length method, I don't need to change much in this for loop apart from changing the, instead of saying chessboard, it's going to do random nums. So if we add them together, all we need to do is create a total variable. So int total, whoops, int total is equal to 0. So we're going to start it at 0, and then we're going to say total is equal to, and it's actually filled the rest in for me. That's very useful. So we're going to say total is equal to itself, and then we're going to add the current row and current column. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. If we add them all together, that gives us the total, which is 10. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 gives us 10. So how do we make sure all of these are now random? So let's remove all of these now, and let's create a bigger array. So let's create an array of 10 by 10 this time. So we're going to get quite a few more numbers in this one. Notice I haven't actually created any set numbers because what we're going to do is we're going to use this random variable. So random, there we go. So we're going to create our random variable. And what we can do to fill out the first element, all we need to do is to say element 0, 0 is equal to random.next, and we'll create a number between 1 and 10. So this is going to create a number between 1 and 10 in the first element. Now I'm not going to create 100 of these lines, am I? So I'm not going to go like this and go 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. If you watch the video, you should know by now that we can simply use a for loop to loop through them all. We're going to copy this for loop, so I'm going to add a little note here to say this is our create random numbers loop, and this is our adding together loop. Just so if anyone else uses this program, they can see what the point of these for loops are. We're going to move this into this for loop, and instead of saying 0, 0, we're just going to say row and column. So now it's going to fill out the random number array with 100 different random numbers, and then it's going to add them all together. So it's created 515. Now I could, if I wanted to double check, print the original array. So we can say console.writeLine. Now this is, I'm not gonna go and actually check because it would take absolutely ages to do. I'm not gonna check if this is actually adding them all together correctly. But you can see how we can actually just double check if you wanted to, and I don't suggest you actually do. You could double check if it's actually working correctly by adding them all up, probably in a smaller array. So I would change the length of this array and make it much, much smaller. Oops, I should be using right here, I've got them the wrong way around. So right here and right line after we've written out all of the columns. So adding 0 to them all, that's interesting. Oh, obviously, because I am actually doing the output before I create the random numbers. So what I was doing there is I was printing out the random numbers, then printing out the random numbers array, but the random numbers haven't actually been generated yet. So there you go, this should actually work now. There you go. So these are all our random numbers, and added together 587. Let's make a much smaller array, a 2x2 array. Then you can actually test if it actually works. So 1 plus 5 plus 9 plus 10, that makes 25. So I'm happy this is working correctly. And yeah, the cool thing about using the getLength method is that I could change these numbers here without having to change anything else on this in this program. So always try and use, when you're looping through arrays, always try and use the length or the getLength for 2D arrays, because it makes your life a lot easier if you have to go back and change stuff. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, give this video a like, give it a subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.